come on in. We'll get started in a few. Just want to make sure people have time to join us. I am Katie here from the UX Writers Collective team. I'm currently based in Detroit, Michigan. And we have Patrick with us, who is in Australia, and it is currently, what did you say, Patrick? 5 a.m.?
5 a.m.
Yeah,
That's fine.
No biggie. But yeah, while you guys are joining, just feel free to drop where you're tuning in from in the chat. Would love to see, what city you're tuning in from and what you hope to learn today. So we'll get started in a second on covering the best way to plan your content design career with Patrick. Okay, wow, we have a lot of Seattle people. Seattle, Chicago, Charlotte, we have London, UK, Ontario, Canada, Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Awesome. Fellow Michigander here. Denver, I was just there. Love Colorado. Awesome. India, very cool. We love to see just, all time zones covered. And we'll also be sending this recording out to everyone after. So don't feel, you won't miss anything. If it's super late or early for you, you will get the recording. Righty. Patrick, you got your coffee? Are you ready to do this?
I'm caffeined up.
Are you caffeinated?
I'm ready to go.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. So we'll get started. And like I mentioned, we will be recording this. And while we go through Patrick's presentation, I'll be taking an eye and keeping an eye on the Q&A in the chat. So if you guys have questions that pop up or need clarification on something, you can feel free to submit that using the Q&A or the chat. I'll watch both. Like I mentioned, this is being recorded, so you can watch it later or send it to a friend, and we'll send it via email. So keep an eye out after for that. Cool. So we're excited today to cover all the content career things. And so Patrick will take you through ways to think strategically about your career, examine what employers are actually looking for, the best way to take a look at your skills and see, where your skills stack up and where you might need to focus your energy, some key insights for passing challenging interviews, and then we'll answer your questions. So it's a lot to cover in our session, so we'll do our best to get through all the questions that you have. And I'm joined by Patrick, like I mentioned. It's Patrick, he's here. So Patrick is a former lead digital copywriter at MYOB, which is based in Australia, one of the largest accounting software companies out there. The host of Writers of Silicon Valley podcast and a co-founder and co-CEO of UX Writers Collective, and also the author of our new career course, which we'll get into. But Patrick is going to take us through all the things today, and we're really excited to have him with us.
Hooray.
Hooray is right.
Oh, whoops. There we go. Sorry, it just took a second. Thank you, Katie. So welcome, everyone. Really excited to have you all here with us. Now, I can't see the chat while I'm presenting. So if you do have questions, Katie's gonna take care of that. And if there's anything particularly pertinent or relevant, she will jump in and ask me to clarify anything. So please, if you do have anything on your mind, put it in chat. We'll do our best to answer it. So as Katie said, we're going to go through a lot today, but I want to start with this quote, because when we actually ask for questions, someone actually asked this. I'm in my first content design role after switching careers. Congratulations to you, by the way. How do I plan the next few years and make sure I continue to grow? And that's what really this webinar is about. That's what this discussion is about. It's understanding, okay, you're either planning on getting into the industry or you're already in the industry. And it doesn't matter whether you're a junior, a mid-level, senior, you need a career plan. You need to start thinking about where are you going to be in a few years' time, no matter what skill level. And understanding that and creating that career plan is actually a skill in and of itself. We spend a lot of time thinking about how do we understand the difference between active and passive voice? How do we create a content operation that is really efficient? How do we write really great strings? But we don't often spend as much time in thinking about where are we going? How do we get there? And I think that's actually really important because content design has really leveled up. In the past few years, the growth has been huge. There are just more jobs. There's more opportunities, as you've probably seen from the number of blog posts and people online talking about content design. The fact that Shopify and Facebook changed their content strategist titles to content designers is a big sign that there's a lot of attention here. And so obviously there are more opportunities, but that also brings new challenges and higher expectations on you and what you can bring to a role. So developing a skill in understanding what skills you have, how to improve them, how to get these jobs, where to go in your individual career plan is really crucial. Now, sometimes people think, okay, well, if I want to have a career plan, that really sounds like I want to become a manager and I want to manage people, and that's kind of like code for that. But that's not necessarily the case at all. Whether you're a manager or not, or whether you want to be a manager or not, you need a plan. You just really need to understand where you are now, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. That's as simple as it is. And really, success depends on understanding a few different things. Number one is understanding how the market has changed, how the content design job field has changed. Secondly, it's about understanding your own values. What do you value in a role and in the work you do? What are hiring managers looking for? So we're going to actually go through a job ad today. We're going to look at the keywords that you need to identify. Your own skills, you really need to be self-aware about what skills are really what you're really efficient at, what you're really good at, and where you might need to improve a little bit in order to get where you want to go. And then you need an actual plan to improve those skills. So how has the market changed? Well, the good news is that there's more results than ever. There's more job results than ever if you search for content designer. As you can see in the little screenshot here, this is a search I did recently. Content designer in the United States, like 8,700 roles, and that's the United States alone. So it's just an incredible amount of opportunity. And if you receive our jobs newsletter, you'll see, every month the number of opportunities that come through is great. And they're not just beginner roles either. There's a huge variety of different roles at different companies. So it's very exciting. But that also means that expectations are rising. As more people enter the industry, what made you stand out 5 years ago is not going to make you stand out now. For instance, understanding how to use a design tool like Figma is increasingly becoming standard. And so you don't need to be an expert, but if you are going for a job and you're up against someone who does know their way around Figma or Sketch or some type of design software, that is going to help them stand out, and it might put you at a disadvantage if you don't have any experience there. So there's also an increasing expectation to be able to tie your work back to business goals and ROI. I think for a while, a lot of content strategists were seen as, like the words people. And so there wasn't really an expectation on us to understand, I guess, the bigger picture. Obviously, content strategy has always been a thing. And so that's definitely been a huge part. But I would say even at the lower entry levels, there's now an increasing expectation to be able to understand where the business is going and how your work actually cascades up to that. Now, as we would all be aware, there's more remote work than ever. During the pandemic over the past 18 months, obviously people have been working from home, and there are more remote work opportunities. Now, that might seem, yep, great, fantastic, but it also means that hiring managers are probably a little bit more stringent in figuring out who is going to be able to work effectively remotely. And so obviously you can never really know what someone is like until you hire them. But they're really looking for people who are, it's a cliche term, but self-starters, people who are able to manage their own time, people who are able to prioritize their work effectively. And so the more you can demonstrate that in an interview process, the more successful you're going to be.
Yeah, and Patrick,
and of course, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, before you carry on, we had a good question in the chat.
Yeah.
Just, you mentioned expectations around tools like Figma.
Mm.
Like, what are the other tools? Like, maybe if you had to think of top 3, and not to put you on the spot, but if there are other tools that you think are must-knows for content designers.
Yeah, I would say anything to do with a CMS. So obviously there are a number of different content management systems, Adobe, WordPress, Drupal, just any type of basic understanding of like how to work within a backend and how to update it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably, I don't know about software itself, but a basic understanding of HTML and CSS is always a good idea. And then even things like just a proficient understanding of something like Excel, which is a great, because if you're going to be doing content audits and stream audits, understanding how to use a software tool like Excel can be really powerful and can help you get a lot done. It's amazing how much you'll think, I'll think something will take forever to do, and you give it to an Excel pro and they'll go, oh, no worries, 20 seconds, done. So the more you're able to understand software tools like that in the type of work you do, the better. So that's just a few. I'll probably think of a few more through the discussion. So hopefully that helps. So when I say that there's more opportunities for seniority, this is a job ad that came up recently. And this is for MasterCard. It's the VP of Content Design and Strategy, which is a pretty cool title. If you're in content design and you're thinking, where am I going? What's the highest aspiration I can reach? I mean, VP of Content Design is probably the highest point you can go without then going into a like a COO or a C-suite level job. And as you can see here in the description, they're doing some pretty interesting and fascinating things. But you can also see that the expectations in this job are pretty high. So you're leading strategy and implementation. And I've just highlighted a couple of things here. And they're asking, are you a seasoned content strategist who's worked on transactional products? So if you're thinking, well, where do I go? Where's the ceiling for this career? This is the type of job that's available to you if you want it. So I see this as real inspiration, because it means that you should be investing in your skills, your job searching skills. You should be investing in just being self-aware about your skills and your ability to pass interview processes, because this is the type of opportunity that awaits you. But you can't create a career plan without first understanding your own values. What do you value? What type of work do you actually want to do? I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people, and myself, I've experienced this as well, where you take a job and you realize, I'm not enjoying the work here. I'm not getting anything done. I'm stressed all the time. I don't like the people I work with. And that's actually a distraction. It's a distraction from your career plan and your career opportunity. So we really recommend coming up with a type of value statement that can help you just anchor yourself in the next however many years of your career. And you just need to ask yourself some basic questions. Literally, what do you want? What do you not want? What kind of management do you work well with? What kind of work do you actually want to do? Do you want to work inside a product, or are you more a person who wants to work inside an app, not necessarily like a software dashboard? What kind of work do you not want to do? Do you just hate information architecture and you don't really want to do that? That's something you need to be aware of, and that's something you need to be asking people in your job interview processes.
Hey,
Don't
Patrick.
just think, Yeah,
Hey, sorry, not to interrupt. It looks like
yeah.
your screen is frozen. If there's any way you can
Oh dear.
you're fine. Technical. There we go.
We're
Amazing.
back.
We're
We're
back.
back.
Yeah, thank
Great.
you so much.
No worries. Um, yeah, so don't just think about the work that you do, also think about the type of people you work with. So do you like working with people who are really extroverted and high energy and, really love, critique sessions where everyone's talking and the kind of like chaotic energy? Or do you like working with slightly more introverted people who might be more willing to have longer discussions in smaller groups, right? So this is just something, none of these are good or bad. It's really just understanding what is the type of environment where you're going to thrive and what gives you energy. And so we'd really recommend coming up with like a statement like this. So this is just an example that I've created. So I should say these are just like random values. I didn't really use this as an example of what I think, but someone might write something like this, as a UX writer, I really value autonomy. So they don't want to be micromanaged, right? They really value the ability to do work on their own. They want to work on new products, not necessarily maintenance of an existing product, but they want to work in R&D and researching new opportunities. They want to work with managers who respect their work-life balance. So that's really important to know as well. Like, who is your manager going to be? What are their values? These are the types of questions you should ask in an interview process. And then it's just being self-aware enough to say, I don't necessarily want to be a manager in my career. For many large tech companies, and obviously there are more opportunities beyond tech companies, there are different types of tracks. So many companies use a term called IC, so individual contributor. And that has I guess, a type of ranking system. The further up you go, the opportunity you have to become a manager. But some
Yeah.
companies, like Dropbox, have separate tracks. You can be an individual contributor or you can go on a manager track. At least they used to be like that. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. But
Yeah,
just
and
being
Patrick,
self-aware there. Yeah.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that's a really great point. We have a lot of like chat questions in the chat on this specifically. So people
Mhm.
are glad you're bringing this up. And so somebody had asked, like, what are your thoughts on specialization versus leadership? And so like, will it be, will there be a principal content designer that can work collaboratively but not oversee a team? And you're seeing that trend with Dropbox. Do you see that as like an example in other companies too?
Definitely. Yeah, I've definitely spoken to a lot of people who have the ability to work as an individual contributor with not necessarily management expectations.
Hmm.
What I will say, though, is that in order to exert the type of change you probably want to see in an organization, you are probably more likely to do that while being a manager. So, for example, if you're becoming a more experienced content designer and you're looking in your organization, you're going, you know what, we should really change this. We should really change this. You really have a lot of ideas about how things can improve. You are more likely to achieve that type of change if you are a manager, because then you just have more scope and influence. That's just literally by definition. So that's just something to keep in mind. There are certainly opportunities to stay as an individual contributor as you become more senior. There is a trade-off, though, in terms of the opportunities you gain. Yes, you'll get to stay away from management, and that's a huge distraction when you're a manager because it's just a completely different skill set. Um, so you'll get to remain focused on your work, but you might not necessarily have the type of influence you might want. So that's just a trade-off that you personally will need to consider. The second thing we need to keep in mind is, like, what do hiring managers actually want? You've probably received a lot of generic job searching advice about how to look for keywords in a job ad, but you need to really be specific in understanding and translating job ads in a way where you can highlight your own experience. And sometimes job ads are written in a very opaque way where you look at the keywords and you think, I don't really know what they're asking for here, and what does this mean? And unfortunately, a lot of that advice isn't really tailored to UX writing and content design. So today I thought we'd quickly go through a job ad and we'd look at the things that you should really be looking for and what will stand out to you. So this is an actual job ad. It's for a UX writer at TikTok. If you're obsessed with TikTok, and as I am, and
Oh
Katie is too,
gosh, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's too addicting.
I think in TikTok sounds now. But if you are interested in this type of job, I would encourage you to go and apply. So you can see that it's a very long job ad. I'm not going to read the whole thing out here, but you can see at the top of a job ad, they probably have these few paragraphs and then a list of bullet points. And you probably, and you look at a lot of these terms and you start thinking, oh, I've seen these before. I've seen advocate for our users, and I'll collaborate closely. And so it's easy to sort of hand wave those away and go like, yeah, normal job ad stuff. But actually, what you really want to be doing is looking at the key areas in this job ad and then thinking, okay, these are the keywords that I've identified. How am I going to start demonstrating my skill in those areas? So this is what I would do, right? If I was looking at this job ad, I would start looking at these keywords one by one. I would go, okay, experienced UX writer. Okay, I need to set my expectations. They want someone who's done this type of work before. They're in a fast growing team. Okay, what does a fast growing team mean? That's like, it's easy to look at that and think, okay, cool, that sounds exciting. But what that really means is you are probably not going to get a lot of one-on-one attention from maybe from your manager, but also you're probably not necessarily going to get heaps of time from the people above them. So you're going to have to be very comfortable with that, and also probably comfortable with shifting priorities. So again, set your expectations. Collaborate closely with product management, design, marketing, user research, engineering, and localization. Yeah, on the one hand, that's pretty straightforward. You have to collaborate with different groups all the time. But think about the different types of people in those groups. I don't know if you've worked with product managers and then also marketing people and then also developers. Some very different personalities in those groups, right? And so you need to start setting your expectations around how you're going to collaborate with those people. And while you're doing this, we've already looked at 3 different examples, right? You need to start writing notes about examples where you've done this so you can come to this interview prepared. So you can start thinking about the anecdotes, tell me about a time when. This is the time you start thinking about how to prepare for those interviews. I won't go through each one individually, but you can see, design thinking, empathy, and data. Okay, that sounds pretty cool. You probably worked with data before, but what does working with data really mean? It means being able to examine it, not necessarily taking it at its word, at face value, but being able to interrogate it. Being able to identify opportunities. It's pretty clear from this job ad, by the time you get to them saying identify opportunities, they don't want someone who's there just to deliver the work. They want someone who's able to analyze information, come to the team and say, hey, we're really missing this opportunity. We should be doing this. So proactive is a bit of a buzzword, but they're really looking for someone in that environment. Comfortable with ambiguity. I mean, that connects the idea of the fast growing team, right? You're not going to be directed all the time about what you should be doing. So you need to be sitting there and thinking, okay, I've got 5 different things I could be doing right now. How am I going to prioritize those? Mm-hmm. Now, again, this is all, you've probably heard this type of information before, this type of analysis before, but in the context of content design, it's really important to understand what experience you're going to mention in your interview. There's a key word here, you're also a content strategist helping to define product narratives. We've talked a lot about the ambiguity between job titles and so on, but when they're saying you're also a content strategist, you're thinking about the big picture. You're thinking about the entire product flow. So again, as you're looking at these types of job ads, you need to have a piece of paper there. For each of these keywords, start thinking about a different anecdote that you can mention in either a cover letter if they're asking for it, or in the interview itself.
Yeah, and Patrick, just really quickly, Amy had a good point. Like the word experienced really jumped out to her in that. in that case, which makes sense because a lot of the roles will say we're looking for an experienced content designer or a strategist or UX writer, title, you know, interchangeable. But like how, I know we'll get to this, but just putting that on your radar in terms of how we think about career transitioning while looking at the jobs.
Yeah, totally. So that's actually what we're going to briefly talk about now. So sometimes you can get put off by that, where they're saying like, we want someone experienced. Oftentimes when they say experienced, it's like they don't want to put a whole heap of time into training someone because either they don't have the time or the money. But if you actually break down what they're looking for, the real question that you need to answer is, can I do the job? Right? Can I do the job? That's what they're looking for.
Yeah, title aside, can I tactically do what they're looking for?
100%. And so that's why you need to start looking at these bullet points in the job ad and go, okay, what are the actual things I'm going to be doing? Writing and editing UI texts, you know, leading content audits, a champion for best practices. That obviously means building relationships with people, managing and prioritizing projects with multiple stakeholders, and understanding how to balance business requirements and customer needs. That's actually a hugely important skill that we could have a webinar on its own. And then, you know, the ability to critique. But if you look at a lot of these, if you're thinking about, okay, well, how do I actually find concrete examples? And you don't necessarily have a lot of experience. There are things you can do. So writing and editing UI text. Have you written text for a button before? Have you written text for a link? They follow the same type of principles, right? Not as complex necessarily, but you're still thinking about what's the audience? What do you want them to do? How are you setting expectations, right? So that's that type of experience you can bring in and you can mention in an interview. They're asking you to lead content audits. Have you done any type of audit? Any type of audit in your organization? Have you done any type of analysis about material? You know, include that in a job interview, right? So you can see you're not necessarily excluded from applying for this job just because you're not experienced. They're really just asking, are you able to do the work? A champion for best practices. I'm sure you've collaborated with different people in whatever job you've done, right? So again, use those types of anecdotes. And then you can see in the rest of the list, these aren't necessarily specific to UX. Being able to prioritize yourself, being able to balance business requirements, the ability to critique, you know, obviously working with writers across teams is a specific skill, but no doubt you've worked with people across different teams. So you can start seeing that actually you're not blocked from applying for this job. You know, it's not specific to UX. Don't try and pass off your experience outside of UX as being inside UX. If someone asks you, you can just literally say, look, I haven't had experience doing this particular thing in a UX framework before, but in my previous role, we've done something very similar. Let me tell you about it, right? So you can see that it's actually less confronting and intimidating than you might think, right? So you've looked at this, right? Let's say you've looked at this job ad and you've looked at this list of skills and you've gone, okay, well, I've got these 4 different things, but I'm missing these 4 or these 3, right? Studying a large number of job applications from organizations where you want to work. Now, remember, you've got your values, right? So you've done your value statement, you're looking at job ads and you're thinking, well, based on my value statement, it sounds like I really want to work, you know, at these 3 companies or these 10 companies. You start thinking, okay, well, what skills do I need? You know, those job ads might have a common thread between them. They all might, I used information architecture earlier. They might all say, we really want people who are experienced in IA. And so you start coming up with a little bit of a direction. You start saying, okay, well, based on my job search research, I really need to improve my work within information architecture. And so tactically, that means you need to prioritizing projects in your current job, but also outside of your job, where you can demonstrate your ability to work within IA and navigation. And then you're left with the question, you know, what needs to change within your work and home life to fit that type of practice into your professional plan? So it becomes a little bit difficult here because obviously not everyone has the same opportunities. If you're in a job where you have access to a lot of different people and a lot of different projects, it's probably easy to sort of like tag yourself into an IA project pretty easily. You can just ask someone, hey, can I just tag along? Not everyone has those types of opportunities, right? So you will probably have to start thinking about, okay, what can I do on my own in order to show that I have this type of skill? And the best way to do that, I think, is to start working on your own website, like a portfolio website, where you can start demonstrating the types of skills that you might need, and at the same time, making material that you're going to use in your job search, right? You can create an information architecture for your own personal website, your own portfolio. You can create strings for your own website and portfolio. So these are things that you can work on your own.
That's like the most meta example. I love that. Like just literally have your entire portfolio be your, next project.
Do a case study on your own portfolio. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You can demonstrate that where you've actually gone through and planned. Okay, well, you might think, oh, well, it's not really that big a deal, but actually, no, you're thinking about, okay, who's my audience? Hiring managers, right? So you can go through a full analysis of what do hiring managers want most? How much time do they have? What are they looking for? And then you can actually start designing the flow that way. And then bring that up in job interviews, just say that, look, I don't have experience in formal information architecture projects, but I did put a lot of thought and effort into my own IA. Let me tell you about it on my own website, right? So that brings us to talking a little bit about interviews and challenges. And I will say we've talked a lot about designing a portfolio and creating and going through design challenges. I'd really encourage you to check out the resources page on the UX Writers Collective site. There are a couple of webinars in there, including, kickstarting your UX writing career, where we talk about portfolios. So I'd really encourage you to have a look there. What I'd encourage you to do, though, is you've already seen how looking through these job ads can help you create a little bit of a career plan, and you've got your value statement, right? That's your anchor. When you go into these interviews now, you can understand what questions you should be asking, and you can understand exactly what you're going into. We can get enamored in the idea that we're in an interview process and we're already near the end, and you might be doing really well, and so a lot of people just sort of need a job, right? And so you don't really want to get really picky about what you're in, but it still helps to understand what your values are and what their values are to see if they align. So for instance, you asked, we said in our value statement, we don't necessarily want to be a manager. So we can ask in this interview, look, I'm really interested in understanding how far I can go as an individual contributor. Can you talk to me about career progression and what that looks like? What's the difference between individual contributor and manager? So you can talk about, okay, you really want to get better at information architecture, to use the example we've been using. You can ask them, I'm really keen on improving my skills in information architecture. What type of work do you do, and what type of projects would I be involved in where I might have the opportunity to learn more about that? And the more detail they can give, the better. You'll see pretty quickly if people know what they're talking about, because some people might say, oh yeah, you'll probably have an opportunity to work on that. They're very vague. Whereas someone might say, oh yeah, absolutely, we're actually working on an information architecture project in Q3. Here's what it's about. Here's what we're going to need. And yeah, absolutely, you'll be able to tag along with that for sure. So the more detail they can give, the better. And then also just design challenges and portfolio presentations. Again, I would really encourage you to look at the Kickstarting Your UX Writing Career webinars. We did get a few questions about this, and so I really think those webinars would be the best ones to look at. But just remember, what's the actual problem you're trying to solve? Don't think about the fancy writing you can do or being clever. I would say a design challenge is not necessarily the time to show off how great you are at emulating the MailChimp tone and voice. I'd say it's I'd say it's the time to demonstrate your ability to understand design thinking and design thinking processes. And that means really boiling things down to what's the problem you're trying to solve. But happy to answer questions about that later. And actually, before we get to questions, because we did get quite a few, I actually wanted to take a second to say that this is actually really hard, right? This is not an easy thing to do. To come up with a value statement to anchor yourself, to do research in job ads to understand what skills you might need, what skills you need to improve. And before we actually get to questions, I want to just take a second and talk about the career course we put together, because the fact that we identified this need is what led us to develop this course. And so if you are looking for a way to develop your own career plan, we've put this together. It has not just one job ad. We actually go through like 6 or 7 job ads in detail across a number of different seniorities to analyze what exactly they're looking for. We have a workbook in the course that contains 9 exercises that's designed to help you build out a career plan and to help you evaluate your skills, make a value statement, and help you build a portfolio that showcases at work. And then it also takes you through how to go through those interviews and design challenges in detail and what you actually need in order to get through them successfully. You'll also map out an actionable career plan. But the really exciting part of this course is when you buy it, you get an hour of time with a content design leader on our coaching platform. So that's built into the price, and you can talk about whatever you want. So if you do the course and you create a career plan and you want to talk about that, you can book time with a coach and you can talk to them about that. If you've got something else that you want to talk about, you can talk about that too. So we do have a special offer for the course, which we'll sort of get to at the end of the webinar. But just something to keep in mind if you're thinking about where to go and what to do with your career, we'd really recommend checking this out. Oh, my keyboards. There we go. Is that showing up for you now?
Yep.
Great. So we got a bunch of really great questions. So I'll go through these, and then I'm sure we probably have some questions waiting at the end, which we'll have some time to answer. So I really want to make sure we have time for those. So someone asked, how do you make time for planning your career when your schedule is full? This is a really tough question as well, because obviously some people have more time than others. If you are 22 and you have no family commitments and you can spend all your time working on your career, you're obviously going to have a lot more time to focus on a career plan than if you're, let's say, in your 40s and you have 3 kids and you're a single parent and so on. There are just so many barriers, right? So what I would say is that planning a career doesn't necessarily take a huge amount of time, right? I know that you can really put as much time as you want into it, but what I would say is that even if you have just a spare 5 minutes, just focus on 3 questions. What am I doing now? Where do I want to be? Like, what type of work do I want to be doing? And what skills do I need to get there, right? That's really just as simple, boiled down into its simplest parts. That is what you're doing. You're trying to understand where you want to go and what skills you need to get there. Now, obviously, there's going to be more time involved in actually practicing. If you are in a job already where you can speak to your manager, and your manager is supportive of your training, I would bring this conversation up with them. And you would say, look, I've really identified these opportunities. I think I can get better here. How can we work on developing me there? There are many managers who will gladly do that. And hopefully you might have a bit of a training budget where you're able to do that. If you don't have that opportunity and you're kind of on your own, I would say join a community. Like, there are many different communities, like the content and UX Slack group, our own, Slack channel, the LinkedIn UX Writers group, and I would put the question to them, and I would say, look, I really want to get better at this skill. What are some ways you would recommend? And then hopefully people in the community will be able to give you feedback. Really lean into the community. There are a lot of really great people in content design and UX writing. So really lean into that, and even just ask them, look, I want to do X, like what would you recommend for a career plan, right? So yeah, that's what I'd recommend. So not always easy, but depend on the community where you can. Is there a framework or something you can use to help plan your career? Well, apart from the career course plan, what I just mentioned, and I definitely encourage you to check out.
Shameless.
Yeah,
I'm just
certainly
kidding.
shameless, but I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't believe in it. So look, there are a number of different frameworks you can use. One popular one is the SWOT framework, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's usually done for businesses, but you could also do it for yourself. And you could look at, okay, well, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? I don't like to use the word weaknesses because it's a little bit, I don't know, a little bit dark, I guess. But just areas you can improve. Then opportunities, start thinking about, okay, well, what could I do in the future? And then threats. What are the threats that might derail my opportunities here or derail my progress? And there's a lot written about the SWOT framework, so you should be able to look it up online and get a lot of good examples. But I would definitely check that out as a framework you could use. I would really, though, again, just bring it back to, by the way, once you've done that SWOT, the work is really on you then to understand, okay, what are the day-to-day things I need to do in order to improve, right? So you probably will need to start thinking about, okay, what are some things I might need to give up or put less time into in order to make progress in my career plan? So it'll really help you prioritize where you're putting your time. So for instance, you might understand, okay, well, if I want to get here, to use our example again, I need to become better at information architecture. But actually, when you analyze your time, you're spending 10 hours a week building a software tool that's just for fun, right? Which is great, but it's just about being self-aware that if you want to improve in this area, you are probably going to have to make some trade-offs in another area about where to put your time. I'd like to know about paths where I can continue to write. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this, about making sure that when you go into a job, you ask, can you tell me about the difference between your individual contributor tracks versus your managerial tracks? But I would say, like, at most organizations, you will find that there are very good opportunities for this. In fact, and one thing to keep in mind is that managing people is a skill in and of itself. And I don't think we necessarily do a great job as an industry of saying that. We kind of just tend to think that as you become a senior, managing people is just second nature. Sure, I want to be a manager, but actually managing people is really hard. I mean, I'm sure we've all had terrible managers, right? And the saying goes, like, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers, right? And so it's a responsibility, and it's really, really, it's really hard. Speaking as someone who's managed people before, it's really hard. So I can't tell you individual companies where a path might be better than the other, but what I would say is that the more you look at job ads and you understand what people are looking for, you'll begin to understand whether people are looking for a manager or they're looking for individual contributors. And then I would just say, be very, very straightforward about your intentions in an interview, and just say, look, I'm really keen on staying an individual contributor, but I also really want to grow my career. Is there a way for me to do that at this organization? So just something to keep in mind. What does the hiring process look like for UX writing roles? It does depend on where you go, but there is a fairly standard process. So there's usually the first hurdle, which is a basic call, usually with a recruiter or a hiring manager, depending on the size of the organization. And that phone call is really just an introduction. It's really just them trying to understand, is this person, like literally, like I can say from my experience, is this person just like, do they act like a human being, right? They're just like, is there a person on the other end of the phone? And are they able to have a basic conversation, and do they sound like they know what they're talking about? And you might get some questions like, what are you looking for? What type of work do you want to do? And by the way, that's why everything we talked about today is so important, so you can answer those questions confidently in an interview. But yeah, so that's sort of like the first area. The second is you'll probably have I guess you would say a basic interview with someone in the team. It could be a hiring manager, it could be the person in the team. It might be, if you're going for a job at a large organization, it might be someone who's not even connected to the work that you'll be doing day to day. It's just someone from within the content design team in the organization asking you questions. And you'll probably get questions like, tell me about your thoughts on content strategy. How do you like to work? Can you tell me about a time when you've had to give a harsh critique, or maybe some constructive feedback, or whenever you had to balance business priorities, the questions we've been looking at today. Then you'll probably go into a design challenge where they'll give you a challenge to complete. At some organizations, those are quite intense. At some, they're less intense. For instance, there are companies in the I guess you would say the typical Silicon Valley, sort of like high tier companies like Google and Facebook, where the challenges can be type intense. If you're going for a job at a small organization, you might not even get a design challenge. They might just look at your portfolio and they might think that, yep, this looks pretty good, let's go from there. But the important thing is, at some point, you are going to be asked, and this is the reason why I put this question, you're going to be asked to articulate the reasoning for your decisions. And that's what's important. You're going to be asked, why did you make this change? Why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? And I would really recommend checking out the book, Articulating Design Decisions, for that. It's a fantastic way of looking at how to explain the decisions that you're making. I will say that the more you are able to do so, the more successful you will be in your career planning and your job hunting. Again, just like I said at the beginning, this is an entire skill in and of itself, apart from just being able to write well and design well. Being able to articulate your decision-making process is the key to going forward in your career. So we'll definitely check that out. What are some interviewing tips for a junior UX writing role? Apart from what I just mentioned, articulate your design decisions clearly, understand exactly what you're doing. One thing I would say is, there's a lot of good advice online, but here's the thing I would come back to. Don't try and pass off your, I don't want to say lack of experience, but I would try to say, don't try and pass off your non-UX writing content design experience as UX writing or content design. Just be honest. People understand that you may not necessarily have a lot of experience, but try and find the similarities in what you're doing. So for instance, if you've come from an advertising copywriting role and you've written a lot of ad copy, and someone asked in an interview, what type of UX experience do you have? And you say, well, I wrote, banner ads, online banner ads. And really that's UX because, people need to click them and blah, blah, blah. That's a bit of a stretch. Just don't try and say that, you were doing UX work when you weren't. Just be honest and say, look, I don't have direct UX writing experience. That's why I really want to be a part of That's why I really want this role. However, I do have writing experience in other formats like advertising, and here are the similarities. Keeping the audience in mind, thinking about what the goal is. Now, obviously the goal is selling, but just put that out there. Just be very straight about it. And people will understand. People are way more understanding than you think they're going to be. How do I find the right job fit? Well, it's really like we talked about today. it's really about understanding what are your values. What do you really want in a role? And not just what do you want in a role, but also what are the type of people you want to work with. I don't know about everyone here, but I can do really boring work if I'm working with really great people. My first job was at one of my first jobs was at McDonald's, which is like the I wouldn't say the worst type of working environment, but it's not great. But when you're working with people who you like, then it becomes much easier, right? And so you really need to ask yourself, who do you like working with, certain types of personalities? And then when you're interviewing, you'll be it's very easy to see, whether that organization is a good fit for you. So I would really just sit down and list like 10 values that are really important to you. And then keep that in mind when interviewing, and don't waver on them. Don't sit there and think, okay, well, I really want to work with extroverted people, but this organization seems like they don't really collaborate a lot, or whatever. Don't compromise on your values. Obviously, there are situations where you do have to compromise, and that's perfectly fine. And everyone's in a unique situation, so absolutely no judgment or anything. But just at least be self-aware about your values and try and understand where you want to go. So
We have Patrick. We have a few more questions if you're okay to take a few more.
Let's do it. Let's answer more questions.
Awesome. And yeah, if you all are still paying attention, there is that code right there, Career 10 for Patrick's career course. But we'll hit a few more questions in the chat. So let me find. Sorry, we've got a couple good ones.
Yeah.
So for this first one. If your current organization doesn't have a deep culture of testing, I understand that you should work towards it, but in the meantime, how do you back up your content decisions so they don't come across as arbitrary, especially in interview situations? So how do you prove that you're making the right decisions when, the data necessarily might not be there?
Yeah, definitely. So I assume this person's talking about qualitative testing and not quantitative testing. Yeah. So yeah, that can be difficult. The first thing I would say is, I'm just trying to, again, articulate myself properly. The first thing you're going to have to rely on is like industry best practice, right? So if you don't have specific research to your situation, the next best thing you can do is say, okay, well, we don't have this situation. Let's defer to best practice. And so there are many resources online where you can look up what the best practice is, particularly around, voice and tone. And I mean, as I mentioned at the start, content design has grown so much that there are so many resources now available for you. So that's one thing I would say. When it comes to articulating those decisions specifically, I think it just comes, I would really recommend checking out that book, Articulating Design Decisions. But with user research, there is research you can do on your own that doesn't necessitate a user testing session. So for instance, if you're wanting to choose between a particular term, can you look up the Google Trends data on that term versus another term? Now, that's not necessarily scientific, but at least gives you something you can point at in the right direction. Are there more search results for a specific term than another? Do you have, if your organization has a social media page or a support forum or anywhere where customers are talking amongst themselves, are they using specific language, right? So I would always point to that, like, are you using the same type of language that your customers use? So those are just a couple of methods you could try. One thing I would always say though is get people in your organization. If you don't have a robust user testing strategy, find people in your organization who are not directly connected to what you're doing and literally just do some guerrilla testing with them, because then at least that is better than nothing, right? So if you're in let's say the dashboard team, right, and you're writing strings and you really need some feedback, go to the other end of the organization, find someone who's in accounts receivable, and literally say to them, hey, I'm so and so, I'm from this team, we're testing out a new feature and we really don't have the budget for a user testing session. Would you mind taking 10 minutes to sit down with me and do some testing, and literally do some guerrilla testing that way? And then you can walk into your organization, into your meeting, and you can say, look, I know we don't have a user testing session, a user testing sort of practice, but I really wanted to do my due diligence. So I did do some guerrilla testing with these 3 people, and I found that X. Look, is it great? Is it the best? No, but it's at least something to back up what you're saying. So that's what I'd recommend.
Awesome. Okay, just a few more questions. So I'll try to combine these two. So when looking at like entry-level UX writing positions, or if you're an entry-level UX writer or a career transitioner, should you be looking for freelance work or part-time work, or are there full-time positions available to like get that experience?
So if you're looking for, you got a bit quiet at the start. So if you
Can you hear me?
What situation are they in?
So if you're trying to transition into UX writing,
Mhm.
would it make more sense to start with freelance or part-time work, or should you shoot for that full-time position to get the experience?
I'd shoot for the full-time position, to be honest. Like if you're convinced that this is what you want to do and it's where you want to go, why not? Obviously, like if the part-time or freelance fits into your lifestyle more, then that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine too. I will say you are more likely to find contract positions more than freelance jobs. Sometimes freelance jobs will be more reliant on people who are experienced. But there might be a startup in your area that needs some analysis or some style work, and so you might be able to work there. But I would generally recommend, if you know this is what you want to do, go for the full-time role.
Yeah, and when you mention contracts, so like contract to full-time depending on performance, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for example, like, a lot of organizations will hire people on a 3-month contract or a 6-month contract. Those are types of work you could go for as well.
Great. All right, I think we have, let's see, just looking through the chat right now.
I'm going to sip my coffee while you're looking.
Yeah. Awesome. Madison just got a shout out. Has a UX writing interview after finishing the course, so she said thanks for
Fantastic. Awesome.
That's awesome.
Congratulations.
Patrick, this question. So how would you present yourself as a UX writer who has experience without appearing unfocused? So Riley, I don't know if you have like a follow-up question to that. Meaning if you're not necessarily an experienced UX writer, like how do you focus your experience to look like you're experienced? Is that the question?
If that's the question, I'm going to say that look at what the job specifically is looking for. So do the work we mentioned earlier where you're looking at a job ad and you're pulling out specifically what are they looking for, and then find the examples of work that you've done to target that. You don't need to talk about everything you've done in an interview. You might just want to focus on the key areas that they're looking for. So if that's the question, that's definitely what I'd recommend. You don't need to talk about everything. Just pick out the things that are most relevant.
Yep. From Brian, how important is having a LinkedIn presence for UX writing roles? After everything in 2020, I canceled social media. So I can answer this one maybe, but also Patrick too.
Go for it.
Well, because I help manage UX Writers Collective LinkedIn and a few LinkedIn groups. And I will say that of all social platforms, if you are going to be on one, I would highly recommend LinkedIn. That's where, I found most of my work, and we've had a lot of folks from UX Writers Collective reach out to recruiters and other people, and LinkedIn is like very, very good about connecting people. So I would say if you're super, super interested in transitioning into the field, meeting new people, doing the work, LinkedIn is definitely the place to be. Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, I totally get it. Like, I totally get wanting to switch up, especially after the past 18 months.
Oh yeah.
But I echo just what Katie just said. And look, if you really don't want to be on LinkedIn, I would say check out the content and UX Slack group, because that's another great community, or our own Slack group. Yeah, um, unfortunately or fortunately, it is kind of the place where you're going to get a lot of the most conversation. So yeah, just be aware about. But that being said, you can be successful without it. So you know,
Yeah.
just again, follow your values.
Yep. This is a great question. Do you recommend working on getting writing published, like on Medium or somewhere, as a high priority, as higher priority over a portfolio? I would say not higher priority, but we do have the UX Writers Collective blog and Medium account, which gets
Yeah,
thousands of eyeballs. And so if you are
yeah.
looking to get your perspective or POV out there in a long form way, that's definitely a great avenue. But Patrick, what do you think?
I definitely agree with that. I would certainly say it's not high priority. One thing I would say, if you do want to write something, I will say the industry has probably moved beyond why you need a UX writer type articles.
Mm,
I am much more interested in hearing about, and Katie is, you're looking at all of the blog posts that come in. You are probably more interested in reading like specific, unique experiences. Like, what can you write that no one else can write about? Have you worked on a specific type of project at your work? Cool, we want to hear about it.
yeah,
It's ironic that you might think, oh, no one would be interested in this, but actually, like, the most unique experiences and the most personal experiences are way more interesting than something that you might think sort of demonstrates your clout, right?
for sure.
So
Yeah.
if you've done a specific project, I want to hear about it. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, and I mean, we even had, just talking about like user experience in general, we had a pitch for someone who their car was broken into and their wallet was stolen, and it was kind of this journey of all of the user um, text messages and alerts they got from their bank, and the emails and the calls they had to make to customer service. And so it was a very specific story and how they were able to unpack the user experience
Hmm,
from written to in person. I thought it was super fascinating. So yeah,
that's great. Stuff like
any
that is
yeah,
amazing.
any case studies you can share, people will just eat up. Um,
Absolutely.
I know we're over time, but there are a couple other really good questions, Patrick. If you
Let's
have
do it. Let's
a
keep going.
few more minutes.
Yeah.
So Samantha had asked, I know PhDs who transition into UX at a senior level. Is it the same for
Mm.
UX writing? Um, or does a PhD not give any ups? So like if you have a ton of UX experience and you're trying to get into UX writing, I think that's the question. But basically
I
like
mean,
seniority level of like how long you've been working in the field versus starting off as like a fresh face.
yeah, sure. I mean, like, if you've got other experience in UX, that's obviously going to help you going into UX writing, because so much of the work is understanding design process and design thinking. So yeah, that's definitely an advantage. I wouldn't say a PhD necessarily is an advantage. Although it's funny, when I did interview someone on the podcast who was doing a PhD in studying nuclear weapons, and they went into UX writing. Yeah, very unique topic.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say a PhD. I wouldn't say a PhD, or even, to be quite honest, I wouldn't even say a degree is necessarily an advantage. To me, that's not what hiring managers are looking for. They're looking for skills and they're looking for experience. So yeah, UX experience always valuable. PhD, not necessarily. No disadvantage, but not necessarily an advantage.
Yep. Awesome. Somebody asked, how do you learn Figma, or how do you get Figma experience? Funny you should mention. Funny you should mention that. No. So we do have a webinar that we hosted, which I can link to in just a second once I'm done talking. That we go through some Figma basics, and then we do actually have a workshop coming up next weekend with Sammy, who is a course instructor at UX Writers Collective. But aside from the workshop, there are a slew of resources online, YouTube videos and other things. But really excited about the workshop because it's focused specifically on using the tool for content design. So we'll go into like manipulating screens and text, and Patrick can go into more detail. But yes, Figma.
Yeah.
I myself never knew Figma, never knew what it was about, started using it a month ago, and I'm obsessed. So I will say I'm the biggest, and that is not sponsored. I love Figma so much. I love Figma so much.
It's good fun. Yeah, would definitely recommend checking out the webinar we have on the resources page. But if you're looking for something more in depth and practical, the workshop next weekend is going to be fantastic. So Sammy is, as Katie mentioned, an instructor with us. She's a senior UX writer at Condé Nast, working on Vogue.
I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, she's a working person, a working UX writer who does this in her job, right? So she'll be able to tell you everything you need to know. So we'll definitely check that out. It's next weekend, but yeah, the webinars as well as a really good resource.
Cool. Well, I thank everyone for joining us. We are almost 10 minutes over, so I just want to make sure we're mindful of everyone's time. There will be many more webinars to come, workshops like we mentioned, Patrick's career course. There's a lot of newness coming at UX Writers Collective, like within the next month, I think. So you'll be hearing a lot more from us. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone again. Thank you for your questions. We'll send up a recap email. And then I mentioned the LinkedIn group. We're on Slack, which we'll include in the email, social, all the things. And if you're not on social, we're on email. So you can reach us whenever. So thank you. Thanks, Patrick, again, for all of your insights.
And thank you, Katie, for helping today. It's fantastic. And yeah, everyone, if anyone has any questions, please hit us up, help@uxwriterscollective.com. Encourage you to check out the career course if that's your thing. And yeah, if not, I'm sure we'll see you online very soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.